The Southern Hemisphere doesn't get enough love. Most places people want to see or know the most are in Europe, Asia, or North America. But down on the other side of the globe, we've got South America. Most of the famous safari locations in Africa are located south of the equator. And of course, the largest continent located entirely in the Southern Hemisphere, Australia. Gotcha, it's Antarctica. But taking a second glance at two of the last major landmasses to be explored by humanity, they are complete opposites in some ways, and yet strikingly similar in others. But Chrome, you may ask, in what world could a hot, dry southern continent whose name starts with an A possibly have in common with a cold, dry southern continent whose name starts with an A? Let's find out. First off, the meaning behind their names. The idea of a great southern landmass existed in the Western consciousness since ancient Greece, that the landmasses of Europe, Asia, and Africa in the north had to be balanced out by a great southern landmass, Terra Australis. This hypothetical continent was called. After the European discovery of Australia by Abel Tasman, the term New Holland was the name given to this continent. The name Australia itself was coined by the explorer Matthew Flinders from Australis and replaced New Holland, whilst nearby New Zealand is still stuck with the name of a Dutch province. Ironically, the Terra Australis concept wasn't fully applied to Australia and ceased to be hypothetical upon the discovery of Antarctica. The origin of the name of this continent also has its roots in a Latin language, although this time the language of love, derived from the Middle French Antarctique, meaning the opposite of the Arctic. And since Australia nabbed the name Australis first, the name for this southern landmass was reduced to the Antarctic continent in reference to the Arctic Circle. Finally, in the 1890s, Scottish cartographer John George Bartholomew coined the name Antarctica. So, right off the bat, one similarity is that both names effectively refer to their southern position on the globe. Now, if you've recently looked at the construed version of a map of the world, Australia always shows up as the smallest continent. In almost every rendition of trying to map a sphere on a flat surface, that is a rare, accurate portrayal. Australia is indeed the smallest continent, being smaller than Europe by about 2,487,976 square kilometers. Antarctica also trails the back of the pack in terms of size, being the fifth largest continent, but still twice as large as Australia. However, with respect to geography, the northernmost point on both is the tip of a peninsula, with the edge of the northernmost continent being creatively named the Antarctic Peninsula and the Cape York Peninsula on Australia. Both have one major mountain range spanning the length of said peninsula, with the Great Dividing Range in Australia and along the Antarctic Peninsula. It is also noteworthy that when factoring in the ice sheets, Antarctica and Australia are flatter than the other continents, with Australia being the flattest on average. In fact, the highest point on Australia, Mount Kosciuszko, stands at only 7,310 feet, whilst Vinson Massif on Antarctica stands almost twice as high at 16,050 feet. In fact, Antarctica also has the highest average elevation of all the continents. And whilst it seems you couldn't find a more opposite pair of environments, with one freezing cold and the other much hotter, especially in the interior, they both are very dry climates. The average precipitation of Antarctica as a whole is 166 milliliters, or 6.5 inches per year, with 80% of Australia receiving less than 600 milliliters, or 24 inches. This obviously fluctuates with location and time of year, but safe to say both continents are dominated by what is classified as a desert climate. But even in these tough environments, a plethora of wildlife has found a foothold on both landmasses, each one home to endemic species found nowhere else on Earth. Of course, we're all familiar with the marsupials of Australia, such as wallabies, kangaroos, quolls, or wombats, and the various penguins of Antarctica, but would you be surprised to learn that there are quite a few overlapping animal ranges on both continents? Now, there is a major discrepancy when it comes to land-based animals. On Antarctica, there are no purely terrestrial species, given, the permanent ice caps, with the best contender being penguins, which are still semi-aquatic. The most iconic and largest species, of course, being the emperor penguin, which ventures the farthest inland solely to breed. And the largest flightless bird on the southern continent, standing only 3 feet tall, can't hold a candle to the Australian equivalent, the emu. Whilst the truly terrestrial fauna on these two continents are about as equivalent as the sun and the moon, there are plenty of semi- and fully aquatic species. The largest semi-aquatic mammals of Antarctica are a plethora of seals, from crab-eater to Weddell and leopard seals, with full marine mammals such as whales aplenty. Humpbacks and minkies make seasonal migrations between each continent, and, if you would believe it, Even a species of penguin calls the southern waters of Australia home, the smallest in the world, in fact, the blue penguin. And that's not taking into account the seabirds that soar over the southern oceans. Despite the glaring differences, the species here are in many ways a reflection of the distant past. Antarctica is a place of inhospitable land where all ecosystems depend entirely on the ocean, not too dissimilar from the pre-Silurian times 183 million years before the dinosaurs. And speaking of everyone's favorite lizards, although more like favorite birds with more recent fossil evidence, Australia is an old continent with very large avians roaming about entirely on the ground like their prehistoric ancestors, with mammals of a more ancient type, not just marsupials carrying joeys in a pouch, reflective of their time as small critters dwelling in the trees, but also the only place in the world with egg-laying mammals, monotremes, the echidna and the platypus. A callback to the divergent reptiles that mammals evolved from, while still retaining the distinctly mammalian feature, feeding their young milk. Yep, the universally unique feature you have in common with deer, elephants, cats, kangaroos, bats, whales, rats, and even our good friend the platypus is not fur, find some of that on a dolphin, not our warm blood, birds got it too, not even the ability to give birth to live young. A few species of shark go through labor as well. It's breastfeeding. And on the subject of mammals, perhaps now it is apt to mention the resident population of Homo sapiens. Both Australia and Antarctica are the least populous continents, with one having an obviously much smaller population than the other. People have inhabited Australia for over 49,000 years, first in the form of the Aboriginal Australians, with over 260 different languages spoken, followed by the European colonization, leading to the present-day population of over 26 million people. Due to its inhospitable environment for human habitation, Antarctica, to no one's surprise, has not had previously nor presently a permanent resident population, although there are numerous research stations located near or around the continent itself with rotating staff for the winter and summer seasons. However, Australia, despite its greater habitability, has a very low population density. You will find plenty of large swaths of empty land in between any form of habitation. And those centers of population you do find tend to predominantly concentrate on or near the coast, not too dissimilar from the placements you might find on another continent. So there you have it. Two places on the globe, seemingly worlds apart, have a lot more in common than a first glance would suggest. But what do you think? How else are Australia and Antarctica similar? What other places around the world that seem like complete opposites have surprisingly a lot in common? Comment below, leave a like, and press the bell button to be notified of future videos. This is your resident Chrome Sealot, signing off.